All right, everyone, welcome back. Here we are in Module 3, which is the continuation of getting out of the employee trap. So let's dive in. Just a quick disclosure, like we do at the beginning of every module, I'm not a licensed attorney, accountant, financial advisor, real estate broker, or real estate agent of any kind. I'm just a student, just like you guys. I have made a lot of money doing a lot of these awesome strategies that I'm now sharing with you. So hopefully that's okay with everybody. Let's go ahead and dive right into the content. So one of the keys to getting out of the employee trap is to become a creator. One of the basic tenets that divides the employee mindset versus the wealthy mindset is the idea of being a consumer versus being a creator. The wealthy are creators. The employee mindset individual is the consumers. They're consuming the jobs. They're consuming the housing. They're consuming the products, right? The wealthy are creating the jobs. They're creating the housing. They're creating the products. So you want to make sure that you're focused on being a creator, whether it's all of those things or some of those things, or you get creative with it and you come up with your own thing as a creator for other people to consume. That is what drives money in your direction, and you get paid for it. So make sure that you're focused on things that are creative. And when I say creative, I mean creating something, whether it's a product, housing, jobs, whatever the case might be. Be a creator, because that is where the money flows, is towards the creator, is towards the creators. Now, I want to talk about drive, because here's the thing: being a creator, being an entrepreneur, being a real estate investor, they are not easy things. They're sometimes very, very difficult things, and you have to have something that supersedes your immediate desire to work on your creation. And and what I mean by that is sometimes, some days, you wake up and you just don't want to be a real estate investor because you're dealing with some big headaches today, right? But that won't necessarily always be the case. I mean, I've been a real estate investor now and an entrepreneur for 7 years, and I wouldn't trade it with all the headaches and all the frustration that come along with that. I would not trade it to go back to being an employee. Ever. I wouldn't trade it for anything. So finding that drive and understanding how to have drive is very, very important in that process. The dream is the seed, and it instills in us a desire to get to a destination. Drive is what actually gets us there. And education, you're going to hear me pounding on that second currency of the wealthy throughout this course. Education and knowledge are the most important and significant keys to accomplishing anything great. The 3 requirements to maintain drive are obedience, sacrifice, and having a mission. Now, let's dive into those 3 things for just a second. Obedience is important because, like I said, sometimes you just don't want to to have to deal with the stuff that's on your plate, and that's fine. When we have a job, we've got a boss that forces us to do that, and we've got to go because we got bills to pay. Well, being an entrepreneur, you are the boss. There's no one there pushing you. You still have the bills to pay, but you've got one less thing that's pushing you. So you have to replace that outside influence of having a boss that's pushing you to do your job with drive. And what I mean by obedience in this particular case is making sure that you're following what needs to be done on a daily basis. It's so tempting when you've got time, when you've got the freedom over your schedule to decide what you're going to do. It's so tempting to go off and do those things that are hobbies, or other distractions like Netflix or watching movies or playing games. It's such a temptation. But if you follow the tenets that are important to accomplishing your goal, and you follow those obediently, what that will do is it will create a faith. It will create a faith in yourself. It will create a faith in what you're doing, in the project that you're working on, whether that's your business or your real estate portfolio, or whatever the case might be. It's maybe some product that you're creating. The obedience to that will create a faith that this is going to work out, and it becomes easier and easier as that faith builds. It becomes easier and easier to be motivated and to be driven towards those things. So it's something that as you put more into it, it gives you more back. And the same works with the second bullet point here, and that is sacrifice. Sometimes we have to sacrifice, right? Sometimes we have to decide, instead of going on that trip this month, I'm going to put that money back into the business and we're going to grow it even more, right? And usually what that means is that down the road, it's a delayed gratification game. Usually down the road, that will, you'll be able to go on a trip that's 10 times more lavish than the trip you were going to go on this month because you made that sacrifice. And it creates, and specifically what sacrifice creates is hope, right? Sacrifice creates a hope for a better life. Granted, you're making the sacrifices now, but you're doing it knowing that down the road it will pay off in dividends. The last thing is having a mission. You need to be focused on something greater than yourself. For example, for me, I really like the idea of progressing humanity forward. I'm very much a humanist, and though politically I'm kind of right down the middle with stuff, I am someone who's very passionate about taking care of our planet. And for me, my mission is that I want to do the things that are going to push humanity forward, that are going to push technology forward, that are going to, help protect this beautiful Earth that we have stewardship over. And so my mission for me is much bigger than just investing in real estate or just being an entrepreneur or just money. Because sometimes the money isn't enough to keep us going. The money isn't enough to create that drive. So it may take you some time to find that. I know it took me a few years to specifically be able to define and articulate exactly what my mission was. And that's okay. If you don't have a mission right away, that's all right. Just be cognizant of that and focus on it so that you can, over time, develop what that mission is and be able to articulate it to yourself. Because once you have that mission in place, it's going to push you forward. And the reward that we get for having a mission that's that's bigger than ourselves and bigger than the money that we can make by ourselves is charity. You find that you're able to start taking on larger problems than yourself and start to be a difference maker in this world and in our society. And so it's an amazing thing. And those are the three things that I have found that helps me maintain drive, and that drive carries me through the tough times, because there are, just like life, just like anything in life, it's a roller coaster, right? There are very, very good days, and I love the good days because they are very, very good. But there's also really frustrating and bad days, right, with headaches and stress, and you got to take both. But the things that get me through that, those down times, is the drive that I have that's fueled by those three things. Now, I want to take a second and define the difference between rich and wealthy. A lot of people think that those things are synonyms. I do not define those things as synonyms. Rich, to me, is just someone who has money, but the wealthy understand how to keep their money. Now, you can be broke and still be wealthy. You could be cash poor and still be wealthy. That's happened to me a few times where, you know what, I went out and made more investments than I should have one month, and it left our checking account a little shy of where we needed to be. But it didn't change the fact that I'm wealthy, because being wealthy comes from a mindset. And that mindset is acquiring assets and cash flow instead of possessions. And making that a priority. Doesn't mean you can't have possessions. Doesn't mean you can't drive the nice car. But make sure that your assets are there, like we talked about in the example of the Jeep Cherokee in the last module. You can have the Jeep, just do it right. Buy the Jeep with an asset, right? Spend your money on acquiring an asset. Spend other people's money on acquiring an asset, and then let that asset buy the things that you want. That's what wealthy is. Being rich just means that you get paid a lot of money, right? That you get paid a lot of money, but most rich people just go out and blow it on cars and fancy doodads. That's not what you want to be. You want to be rich instead of wealthy. The tax incentives for the wealthy, are not bad. And what I mean by that, and I noticed the typo there. Sorry for that. The tax incentives for the wealthy are not bad. People are good or bad. Now, what I mean by that is a lot of people, they criticize the wealthy because, they're not paying, quote unquote, their fair share of taxes, or they're not doing this, or they're not doing that, right? Or they fired people, or, this or that. I hear all sorts of criticism toward the wealthy. The wealthy are not bad. People are good or bad. Also, one of the things is I hear a lot of religious people say, well, money's the root of all evil. That's not true. Money is a tool. People are good or bad. And it's how people use that money that defines whether the money was used for good or bad purposes. But that's up to the person. That's not up to the money. Money can be used for good just as much as it can be used for bad. Money is an inanimate object. So let's talk about risk for just a second, because that is something that I find employee mindset individuals are paralyzed by, and that is risk. The one thing that mitigates risk is knowledge. Knowledge and education mitigate risk. Also, volume mitigates risk. Now, we're going to jump back to that education one in a second, but let's talk about volume. What I mean by that is if you go out and do one fix and flip, well, you're either going to make money or you're going to lose money, right? So there's a very high possibility that you're going to lose money. But if you do 100 fix and flips, chances are you're going to make money on most of them, right? So that lowers your risk by simply doing more, by doing more at scale. And that's why we have such an emphasis throughout this education platform. We have such an emphasis on doing real estate at scale, because volume mitigates risk. Risk management is knowledge about fear and how to overcome it. One example I have is I had a friend one time that was scared to death of spiders. She would, if she saw a spider, she'd just seize up. She'd paralyze, right? And I kept telling her, look, if you just studied spiders, if you understood them more, you would be less scared of them, because knowledge mitigates that fear, right? And so it all comes back to knowledge. It all comes back to education. And there's an example that I use a lot, and that is of a heart surgeon. A heart surgeon, unless you're a heart surgeon and I'm talking to you, then, this may or may not apply to you, so get creative. But I assume most people I'm talking to right now are not heart surgeons. So I'm going to give the example. If you or I tried heart surgery today, we would do that at a very, very high risk, because we don't know what we're doing. In fact, the risk would be so high that we would probably kill somebody. And that's a problem. And because of that risk, none of us in our right mind would go out and try that, right? However, real estate investing tends to be this thing, and it's an interesting anomaly to me, but real estate investing tends to be this thing where people watch a few episodes of those fix and flip TV shows, and then they think they're experts and they go out and try it and they hurt themselves, right? Risk is not something that's static. Risk can be mitigated. For example, if I'm more educated in real estate investing than you are, then a good deal for me might still be a bad deal for you, even though it's the same deal. And the difference is just the amount of knowledge that we have respectively. So, knowledge was what mitigates that deal. A heart surgeon goes and does heart surgery every single day with like a 98 to 99% success ratio. The only difference between you and me and a heart surgeon is the amount of training that they had, the amount of education that they had, and as a net result, the amount of knowledge that they have in that particular area. So they mitigate their risk through knowledge. It's the same in real estate investing. It's the same in entrepreneurship. We mitigate our risk through knowledge. So let's talk about fear. Let's jump back to that fear concept. In my book, Mindset to Millionaire, I talk about the difference between short-term fear and long-term fear. So let's talk about some of those differences. In short-term fear, usually these are the things that keep us in our comfort zone bubble. Right? It's the thing that keeps us in the job, even though we want to be the real estate investor. It keeps us going back to work and never, taking a risk and going out and doing real estate investing, or never quitting the job so that we can do it full time. One example of short-term fear, it usually convinces you to do things that are short-term fixes, not long-term solutions. With long-term fear, it's usually a good thing. It deals with your long-term goals and desires. So short-term fear often conflicts with long-term fears. And long-term fears, unfortunately, are often overridden by short-term fears, right? For example, I'm scared of spiders. Well, if one of your long-term goals is, one day I want to visit a rainforest, and your short-term fear is I'm scared of spiders, that may stop you from visiting a rainforest. It may stop you from knocking off one of your bucket list items, right? So your long-term fear would be, I may never get to visit a rainforest. And the short-term fear is I'm scared of spiders, so yeah, I can't go to a rainforest, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Another example of a short-term fear, I'm scared of heights. But a long-term fear is, I've always dreamed of being a pilot, and I'm worried that I'm never going to hit that goal of being a pilot. Well, if your short-term fear is I'm scared of heights, then that's going to be something that will probably prevent you from doing that if you don't consciously overcome that short-term fear in order to hit the long-term fear. Another example of long-term versus short-term. The long-term fear might be I'm really scared that I will never break out of this employee trap and become a wealthy real estate investor and entrepreneur. I'm really scared that I'm never going to do that. But your short-term fear that overrides that would be, well, if I quit my job, how will I feed my family tomorrow? So those short-term fears versus the long-term fears. I'm sure a lot of you experience those short-term fears in your decision to purchase this education, right? Well, geez, that's a lot of money. I don't know. I'm scared to spend that kind of money, right? That's a short-term fear. The long-term fear is, what if I never become a real estate investor and an entrepreneur and make the kind of money and have the kind of time freedom that I want? So just by the simple fact that you're here, and I congratulate you, there's an example of you overcoming that short-term fear of spending that money in order to accomplish and mitigate the long-term fear of wanting to be a real estate investor. So well done. Hopefully that gives you a good illustration of what I mean between short-term fears and long-term fears. Summation: short-term fears are usually bad for your future. Long-term fears are usually good for your future. Right? So we should be focused more on the long-term fears than we are the short-term fears, and get rid of the short-term fears with knowledge. That's how we mitigate risk. That's how we mitigate fear. That's how we mitigate all of those things. So that's what I have for you for Module 3. This concludes getting out of the employee trap. Next, in Module 4, we are going to be talking about how wealthy people own a business, how and why, and all the things that they do. So I'm looking forward to seeing you in Module 4. We'll see you over there.